You're live.
Okay, this is Senate Transportation Committee. It's Thursday, February 1st. We're continuing our discussion about automatic traffic law enforcement. And we have with us Judge Zone. I forget your title, Chief Superior Judge. And just I'll let you know, I don't know if you were told before that the bill S-184 does a lot with automatic traffic enforcement. Our discussions have pretty narrowed it down to really talking about speed enforcement in work zones as a pilot. But if you have anything to share with us about automatic law enforcement with cameras, that's what we'd like to hear.
Thank you. So Tom Zone, Chief Superior Judge for the record. I took a look at the bill as introduced, and when I go through a bill, I don't talk about policy. That is in the purview of the legislature, but I approach it from the perspective of, if as a judge I look at the structure of the bill, is it going to effectuate what you intend?
Yeah.
Are there going to be impediments or areas where there might be questions or concerns raised by the language? And also, in terms of the language, are there areas that I would recommend that if you wanted to act a certain way, you might want to consider?
Right.
Some would say, well, that sounds like a policy. No, it's just basically you make the policy, but here's the impact of the policy that you make. Mm-hmm. And so when I went through the bill, I generally go through page by page. And so on page 5 of the bill, at line 14, it talks about if you're going to use this automated law enforcement system, it says at a location in the vicinity of a work zone, and if the agency with jurisdiction over the location determines. And then it talks about and sole discretion. Well, the way jurisdiction works is you have concurrent jurisdiction with many agencies. For instance, the Windsor County Sheriff has jurisdiction in front of my house in Heartland. State Police has jurisdiction in front of my house in Heartland. We don't have a local police department. What happens if the sheriff says, here's what I want to do, and the state police says, well, we want to do something different? So there's a question that I first would have is, when you use that phrase, agency with jurisdiction, does it consider multiple agencies who have jurisdiction? Below that, it talks about a traffic and engineering analysis in line 19. These types of provisions are somewhat similar to what happened years ago when the motor vehicle statute at 23 VSA 1007 was amended. When that was amended, that's the local speed zones. Mm-hmm. It said that municipalities could drop below the state limit, but they had to do traffic and engineering surveys, and it added a number of criteria. And this stands out to me because when I look at this, it talks about the entity doing it in their sole discretion. And so as a judge, what I wonder is, what happens if they abuse their discretion? What happens if what they've done is demonstrably wrong? It's still in their sole discretion. And so when you use phrases like that, it sometimes can have impacts on the court if they're hearing disputes. And so you may want to take a look at that. I understand that you want to leave it flexibility, but the question is it flexibility that can be challenged?
Is there other language that works better for that, or is it just something we have to be conscious of?
I think that there's other ways to address it, and I'll hit on that when we talk about hearings and things like that. There are provisions on page 8. It talks about annual calibration by a calibration laboratory. I don't know what a calibration laboratory is. Is there a certification? Or is it somebody opening up a shop in Westford saying, well, I'm a calibration laboratory? I don't know. Yeah. And so as a court, if someone challenges the calibration, we would have to know, well, does this meet the standard? And is the standard clearly identified?
I wonder if that comes under ag and NIST.
Right.
No? Seriously.
There might be a NIST standard for the radar.
Same for measuring gallonage accuracy of gasoline or electricity or whatever. So, oh my God, we didn't even know what NIST was, but now we know.
Yeah. Trying to talk about it at least once a day.
There's a provision on page 8 also about the penalty. It talks about the owner of a motor vehicle bearing the registration number is the one who gets the ticket. Mm-hmm. That's policy. And so I won't get involved in that. But what happens, our registration in my family has my wife's and my name on it.
Yeah.
Can we make sure they all go to her? I don't know. And so this does not account for multiple owners. And so how is that going to be addressed?
We heard about that from Susanna Davis, about the one-car families and families not only in color, but families of
Or limited means.
limited means, and where
This is-
you could have multiple drivers.
But there's multiple drivers with one road, but you could have two people listed on the registration.
Right.
That's correct.
So it's important to highlight is that this would be seen like what we currently accept with parking tickets. So parking tickets similarly are issued to the car and not necessarily either the drivers and the owner of the car, be it two or so on, would need to pay that would be a good standing. And these would be of small scale with no points to the driver's drivers.
The question that would arise though, what if owner A says, I'm not gonna pay it, they're the one that got the letter as opposed, and what if owner B, they have different addresses, things like that, because right now under motor vehicle, you send the tickets, I believe, for operation, which is what this is, as opposed to parking, which is, even though you're saying this is non-moving, it really is a moving. It's something that comes from operation of the vehicle on a highway. The question comes up, where do you send the ticket? And usually you use the address that's on someone's driver's license. Here, if you're gonna get the registration, it could work, but I think there could be areas where there's complications if you have more than one owner. And is it joint and several liability? In other words, are both parent parties, what if neither pay? Do both of them get consequences to go out to have to pay it under the penalties when you try to enforce it?
If I may. Could you enlighten us on parking tickets issued by municipalities and so on? Those don't end up in your courts, do they? So
We don't see those. I don't have much experience with those.
So I would bring this to sort of model after that, so that hopefully we can find paths where it doesn't necessarily clog up the courts, and it is.
I can look into that and find out more. My experience with parking tickets, hopefully not getting any, was back from my days of writing them when I was a police officer in the 80s in Woodstock. So
Yeah.
there was things were much different back then as far as tickets go.
But that is the way we're kind of thinking of this, is it can't be an assessment that's just sent as a parking ticket is.
That may work. On page 8, it also talks about the penalties, and there's an entire penalty structure. There is already penalty structures for speeding tickets.
Yeah.
Creating an entirely separate penalty structure brings with it, I think, a number of issues, not just for law enforcement to get the right one, if you will, but also for the judiciary to be able to, whether it's our Odyssey system or hearings, having multiple penalty structures can be problematic. And so I point that out. That's a policy decision, but it may be very helpful if we had one fine structure. If a fine is appropriate for someone who's behind the wheel and you're going to stop them and give them a ticket, if the law enforcement officer happens to be monitoring that work zone, shouldn't that same fine be appropriate
Very good point.
if someone is driving and doesn't get stopped and gets a ticket for the same thing? So that's a policy decision.
One
But
gets points, one does not.
Right. We were trying to also maybe make it less likely that they would object to it. If it's $100 fine, they're gonna I want to take this, to court. But if it's a $25 fine, maybe they're like, okay, I learned my lesson, hopefully. I got the ticket, I see the picture, I'm gonna slow down when I'm in the work zone, maybe I'll just pay the $25. So I think that was the reason. I think you'll find they were all lower than.
I believe they were. I suspected that might be it. That's a policy decision.
Sure. But I hadn't thought about the difficulty of two different systems.
There is on page 13, at the top of the page, it talks about a complaint and being returned, there has to be forms and the return of the complaint. The complaint has to have certain language. This would require all new forms. So there would be one form for people who you stop and one form for others. And so that, if that's the policy, that would have to be effectuated. But we already have forms for civil violations and complaints. Those forms already have requirements in for deadline, for timelines and consequences. And one of the issues that I'll touch on is that it's important, I think, to have consistency in all of the timelines. When you start giving someone who gets one of these tickets 30 days to respond, when everyone else in our system gets 20 days, our system and our procedures are geared for what the rules currently are for motor vehicle tickets. And the moment we start adding in different timelines, it sows confusion, and it actually sows issues with Odyssey and moving ahead there. So I would suggest that it's more direct and simpler, and there's more predictability if you have one system.
Yep.
For timelines.
I completely agree that consistency is important. I would just bring us back to how, looking at how other states do it, and if they're not in the same systems, if this is outside of necessarily law enforcement, more in Department of Motor Vehicles, then I'd be more comfortable with a departure from this with different standards and different conditions and so on. But I agree, consistency is important if they're gonna end up in the court system when they get one of these tickets. But if we can avoid that and have this just be focused on safety, then I'm less inclined to have it directly matching your.
But is there kind of an equal protection issue when, if I'm stopped by law enforcement and I get fines and I get points versus I get a camera and an assessment and I get a $20, it's kind of an interesting.
There have been a number of cases that have been brought asserting that these types of procedures have constitutional infirmities, and there have been decisions that have approved and said that these types of cameras are red light cameras or work zone cameras are okay. I cannot opine and touch on that because that's precisely the type of issue that if this were enacted would come before the judiciary. So I can't give any opinion on whether this would match the constitutional protections.
Could you give us understanding what you just said, but if there's anything you can say, like just if there's cases where the case is not brought by the person that got the camera ticket, but the person that got pulled over by an officer, it says like, I'm treated unfairly because my neighbor was doing the same speeding and only got a $20 assessment with no points. I got $100 and 2 points. So I've been treating it unfairly.
We often will see individuals in the courts. I can't think off the top of my head of anyone arguing that as a constitutional issue in the Judicial Bureau, and I don't preside in there, but we see. I don't hear about that. But what I can say we do hear about is the citizens will recognize that. And while it might not rise to a level of a constitutional issue, it's a policy issue for the legislature to have what is viewed by the citizenry as disparate treatment.
Right.
And that is something that, yes, we do hear in court. Why did this person get away with this? Why am I getting this? So that is something that people say.
And their parents, right?
My understanding is that there's examples of that currently happening. For example, if a store owner, Kohl's, witnesses shoplifting, they can't, and then they call the cops and the cops show up. The cops, my understanding is they cannot detain the person because the police officer did not see that offense. But had the officer been there and saw the offense occur, they can in fact detain the officer.
That's correct. Under Rule 3 of the Rules of Criminal Procedure, there are certain limitations on whether when an officer can make a custodial arrest for someone for an unwitnessed misdemeanor.
I see a comparable to this. So if an officer pulls somebody over, that's the officer witnessing the action in the context of it. So it carries a different track and penalty as opposed to when a machine might issue it.
It doesn't carry a different penalty.
Okay.
It carries a different introduction to the judicial system. By the one, you have the potential to be held. If someone is arrested with a witness misdemeanor, the officer then, if the officer takes them into custody, the officer can either release them with a citation immediately, or if the officer says, no, I'm putting you into custody, the officer then has to prepare their affidavit, call a judge, take them to court, get conditions of release if it's after hours. Whereas if it's an unwitnessed misdemeanor, they give a citation. The end result of both of those encounters is the person's first day in court. But the potential consequences and penalties are exactly the same if it's the same charge.
Last things, Chair. I hope this goes to the judiciary because this is definitely outside of our normal transportation discussions.
Yeah, no, it will go over there.
Well, one of the other issues when it talks about the defenses, this is a policy, obviously, as far as whether the person is has the ability to say, well, I wasn't driving. This says no. I can assure you that if this is passed, that we will hear about that in court. You mean to tell me, and the judge will sit there and go, yes. Sir, the law is that that is not a defense. As you are aware, I'm sure through testimony, in many states that have these systems, that is a defense. In many states, there is the ability of the registered owner, when they get this ticket, if they send notice to the state saying, I was not operating, I don't know if they require, may require affidavits, but if you say, I wasn't operating, here's how it goes, here's who it was, then they get that ability to not have to go in and address the ticket. So there is that we'll call innocent owner defense that some states have enacted. This does not provide for that. But what this does have with it is, it says if the car is stolen, well, it doesn't say what if somebody stole the plates. So who gets the ticket, the plates or the car? Well, the plates get the ticket because that's where it goes. So if you have someone who has license plates on let's say Toyota Tundra, and you have somebody that has and they take those license plates and put them on a Volvo, the Tundra is getting the ticket. This doesn't have an exception for that. This still says, well, the Tundra, you're the registered vehicle, so you should be getting that ticket. So it doesn't account for stolen plates. It accounts for stolen vehicles.
Senator Eagles?
I wonder if maybe we ought to be taking a look at what New Hampshire's doing for their toll plazas. And we're hearing all the time, and the LG had a thing the other day where, we actually went to the wrong person, and I'm wondering how they do it, what kind of, how they're getting around it, because it's basically the same thing, it's the same idea.
They probably have some rebuttal.
Yeah, so I mean, the whole structure of this bill might be very wise to look at exactly how they're doing it with the toll plazas in New Hampshire.
And that's when we're trying to get somebody from Delaware, because my understanding is that's how Delaware does it, or they just passed a law last year. So they're just in the process of implementing it. So that's the goal, to get somebody from Delaware.
And to Judge Zoni, you're raising so many very valid points, which is why this bill I don't think has necessarily my support in its current form, and instead I really call back to previous discussions where a pilot, where this would be much more introductory and just work safety zones to work through a lot of these concerns gradually, incrementally.
Sure.
Is probably the direction I currently support.
But this is very helpful to go through.
And
It is, very.
on page 13, there's also, it talks about, now we're getting to what we'll call the court side of things. It talks about if you contest it or pay the ticket, and then it says if you contest it, the Bureau shall schedule a hearing, and hearings shall be held pursuant to 4 VSA, and it has the statute there. This again, if you're going to have timelines, they should all be the same. And so it then talks about the hearings being held and how they're going to be held. Well, under Rule 11, under Statute 1106 of Title IV, that sets forth the statutory criteria for hearings, and then it says, well, hearings are also held pursuant to any rules that the Supreme Court may adopt. And there's a rule of civil procedure 80.6, which has been enacted, and what that rule does, it is Judicial Bureau proceedings. This sets forth a comprehensive rule for the Judicial Bureau to follow for applicability of rule, information from defendants, summons and complaint and answer. In other words, this rule contains quite a bit of information and the procedures for what happens in all tickets. And so if this bill were to go forward, my recommendation would be that you take the areas where you bring in the court and try to get back to the existing rule with timelines and things, and don't set up a separate system. Have the rules that are currently in place just addressing this particular ticket.
Anthea was involved, but I don't think I can't remember which legal drafter.
Says it up there, Nick Lynn and Dexter Cooper. Nick Lynn.
No, it's this one. It's just, yeah.
Something that you also have to address when you're dealing with civil cases, on page 14, it talks about payment, and if it's not received, what happens, and basically it becomes judgment against the individual. There is a law called the Soldiers and Sailors Relief Act.
Yeah.
Have you heard about? Okay,
Yeah.
I won't I won't belabor that, but that's not accounted for in
Yeah.
here, and that's important.
Yeah.
And I see that there's limitations on page 16 where it talks about recorded images are exempt from public examination, inspection, and copying. One of the things in Rule 80.6 talks about discovery. If you get a ticket and you believe that there's a problem with maybe that machine operating that day, let's say you hire a third-party vendor to go and do it. Some states have done that. I'm not opining whether it's okay or not, but some states have done that. And the person hears about, well, you know, I heard that that vendor had problems with X, Y, and Z in their equipment. And there might be records that they want to see for that day. They want to see all the video footage that that van had that day to see if maybe, was there a glitch in the system? Was there a problem? So even though there's no discovery in the Judicial Bureau, the court can allow, if someone has a valid basis to try to defend themselves from a ticket, the party to engage in discovery. One of those areas of discovery might be to say, I want to see the rest of the video for a certain limited period of time. Under this, it would not be something they would have access to, because if it's not their case, somebody else's data is exempt. And so that's a policy decision, but I suggest there's also a fundamental issue there. If someone's going to be trying to to defend themselves, they should have an opportunity to do that, a meaningful opportunity. That's due process. And so you may want to build in, you know, absent good cause shown, you know, and by the court, something like that. If you build something like that into a statute, that provides a basis for the court to allow access if it's necessary. It doesn't mean you get it all the time.
Hey, can you opine on, and maybe this is the policy question, but my understanding of the Delaware law is that there is basically no due process for like a lower offense. Like, I think they have different levels of the ticket, so that I think if it's under $25, there is no due process.
I can't opine on that because Delaware, if I'm not mistaken, is a relatively new law.
Yeah.
And my suspicion is that we're going to start seeing those types of issues come out.
And there'll be some case law.
Yeah, it just seems like, I don't know how you could get away with not having some due process.
That's why I'm kind of wondering why we shouldn't maybe be looking at New Hampshire, who's had it and has vetted it, and seeing how they're getting around, because I'm sure that the same challenges that we're gonna see on this are already been.
Right, and New York does it just for like for all the bridge crossings. They have cameras for everybody that's crossing the bridges that they send. If you don't pay on the monthly, if you don't have the little transponder, then they'll send you a ticket in the mail.
Yeah, New Hampshire, for instance, on the Easy Pass on 93 North in Hooksett, it says, no pass, pay within 7 days.
Yeah, right. And if not, they do say.
They all know who you are.
Yeah, right.
Florida and Georgia, they don't have Easy Pass. Just you go through there, they say, we're sending you a ticket.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Ticket.
Yeah.
The one message I would really hopefully leave you with is, if you develop a policy that you want to go forward on with this bill, to the extent that you can have it as far as implementation for the procedures, timelines, to be consistent with what we currently have for all other tickets, that's critical.
Yeah.
As far as being able to make sure we process things in an appropriate manner.
I agree.
Yes.
Very much.
And as you go forward, if there's any questions that you have, don't hesitate to let me know. And if Ledge Council, I will oftentimes visit with Legislative Council if they say, well, you know, how do we do it? And I can come up with some ideas on, you know, here are the rules that you have to have, and try to get them in.
Right. And some of these things, if it goes forward, might just be dealt with in judiciary where you're probably a familiar face.
I was there this morning. I do have to smile. There was one, I did think of one question. I was asking myself, I said, okay, how does this work? What if it's a state employee driving a state car?
Mhm.
So is the state going to pay itself?
Right. Yeah, which probably, I think that happens when state people take cars through like New Hampshire toll. The state would get the ticket.
Well, but going through a toll plaza that maybe doesn't have a cash option is different than speeding.
Yeah, no, it's definitely different, but yeah. They have to find that employee.
Because it's the car, not the driver. Obviously, if you were driving a state vehicle and you're picked up, you're the drivers. That's.
Does the ticket go to the Senate Pro Tem or the governor?
Yeah.
Or the lieutenant governor?
I think the chair of appropriations,
Chair of
'cause they
appropriations.
have all the money, they gotta pay the fine.
Sure, yeah,
I have no money.
I can see another sub account.
Another sub-account. Mhm.
Thank you, Judge.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
It just shows nothing is simple.
I know, yeah,
Mhm.
as we keep finding out. Yeah.
So what are we?
We're gonna have Scott Davidson in.
Can I borrow you for 30 seconds?
Have you heard from him? Is he here in the building or is he zooming out?
I think Mike Smith is gonna be here as well.
Is he Mike Smith?
In Holland.
Okay, I think he's
What I was trying to make about consistency,
Nice.
I don't want this through the court system, it's really, I would love it to just be something else. Outside, not just administrative.
Well, I know,
Take it over.
it's not an assessment,
Thank you.
I mean, if it's assessment's not fine, maybe it should come to DFB, but
Mr.
then
Davidson, you can have
then you
some.
still got that issue around.
I see.
Well, I got points at $100 and you got nothing.
That's the difference. Yeah, I don't know.
Life
When I
isn't
was looking at it with an idea of a scaled down version,
Hey, how are you doing?
she was like, you gotta have some kind of. If you don't do it through the judicial bureau, then you're asking DMV or somebody else to do it. Yeah, I think the deputy commissioner.
And what about the transportation board?
Yeah,
They're,
we
they're
didn't,
an
I
appellate
didn't bring that up with
for certain
the
decisions.
deputy commissioner is gonna be provided.
Shifted for just 2 minutes, no, it's 2:64.
And I also sent an email about ATV. So if I can talk to you about that as well. And Senator Ringel's interested.
And one responded back to.
Oh, she did? Okay.
Yes.
So maybe that's,
I haven't read it either, I saw she responded back, so that's as far as I
maybe that's
got.
it. Well, we're just gonna wait for Senator Ringels to come back in. Should be, or maybe he's got a court.
I don't know. I have no idea.
There is. Hey, how are you? How are you? Good.
Okay, so we will continue back on our miscellaneous DMV. We're not going to continue our discussion about automatic law enforcement, automatic traffic law enforcement. License plate cameras, probably an easier way to say it. This is back to our DMV bill and all of the different things around inspection.
Oh, my God. Torture.
Let's say that, but Captain Davidson, he gets to do this every day.
He's smiling.
Yes, every
He likes
day,
torture.
every day, all day, inspection.
It's Groundhog Day, right?
Yeah.
Well, window tint, certainly turned out to be more complicated. and-
Yeah, maybe we're gonna get more coverage.
And rusted rotors.
Rusted rotors, muffler stamps, and window tint are things that we were talking about that would affect the inspection system, so we wanted to have you in, so.
Sure.
Say your name for the record, and if you have things to say about that or questions for us, then.
Sure. Scott Davidson, Department of Motor Vehicles. I'm the Chief Inspector.
And a captain, so when we think.
Yeah, Captain. Yeah, that's law enforcement rank. Yes,
Okay,
yes.
all
And
right.
you still retain your
Certification, correct.
certification?
Yeah, yes, I do.
Before we start, we did have some very complimentary testimony that came from
Oh, yeah,
uh,
Bob Church.
Bob Church
Mhm.
in terms of a situation involving a repair shop, talking about you need expensive shocks and how your staff followed up, and he gave very high praises in terms of the way in which the situation was handled and the staff person who was involved in the follow-up. So we don't oftentimes get that kind of feedback, but we got it, so you should know about it.
I appreciate that. That's excellent.
Yes, Senator Schiff.
I don't know if you had prepared remarks, but one question I was really hoping that you might touch upon today is, in previous testimony, I think it was said that the process for changing the inspection manual is very, very involved. It's a lengthy thing with rulemaking, and it's no small chore. And so my question to you is, partly why I'm only interested in bringing up rusted rotors again is in the concept, in collection with possibly Windows tint muffler stamps, if it has been approximately 5 years. And my question to you would be, are you looking at other things that might queue up to sort of fall into that same bucket of reconsiderations for how we're doing inspections? And is 5 years usually the life cycle when we review these things? Looking back over the last 30 years, is it usually every 5 years that we're updating the inspection manual, or is it less frequent or more frequent?
I couldn't go back and historically look back in the past. I've only been with the agency for 7 years, so I can tell you the last 7 years. And I know the previous manual was 2013, then we updated it around 18, 19, the final version. Yes, the process for APA is involved and is time consuming, and but that's part of it. I mean, it's also, we have to make IT changes to AVIP, which is costly, also time consuming. So when we tend to wish to make changes, like there are some things, like little wording things that we missed that I'd like to go back and change, but it's not something that I'm gonna go through that whole process to make a change. It's not big enough for me, to go back and do. And so we haven't. So yeah, there are some things, but nothing that's going to have me go through all that process and time and money and expense.
Senator Ingles has a question too.
Sure.
We're just hitting you with questions before.
Yeah, I know, and I apologize, because you probably do have some prepared remarks, but the chair did kind of switch it up a little bit about what we would talk about and what we wouldn't talk about. So I think the thing that I've wrestled with, and I think that looking at the committees wrestle with, and hearing testimony that we didn't have actually sitting in the chair, is just the frustrations of rusted rotors. Just if there was just a way that we could get there quicker, about having formality amongst all the shops about what we can do, what's a rusted rotor, what's not a rusted rotor, and get there quicker so that we can get to that point of
What's the safety?
what's the safety thing. And I think that's the thing that I keep on here and going around this table, how do we get that point across, or what's legal, what's not legal, how do we get there?
We hear 1-year-old vehicles are getting caught up in this, and they're having to replace at $800.
Yeah,
And you're like, a year-old vehicle, can't pass the
7,000
safety.
miles.
Yeah, so those are the kinds of things that we've been hearing, which raises the question about, do we have a standard here that is way beyond a safety issue, and
Yeah.
it's adding a lot of expense. Obviously adds income to repair shops, but
sure.
we talked about this last year too.
He brought in rotors and he showed us and all of that, but I think it's to the point now where the consumer even needs to be educated to the point to where if they really think that they're not being treated fairly, if it's just a rusted rotor situation where they're pretty convinced that they could go out, run their brakes for 2 miles and come back, that problem probably wouldn't even be a problem. It would just go through the inspection process, but that's what we're wrestling with.
So I brought this to share with you folks. Just take a look at this, and based on the criteria that we talked about, would you say that this is a fail or pass?
I've got a clue,
But I'll add to it.
but I'm having no training.
If I
No, just based on what we're talking about.
Well,
I'll answer your question with the following. The concern that,
looks like the hubcaps a little corroded
well, this keeps
there.
coming up is
But you can see the rotors, bright orange and rusted, correct?
Uh-huh.
I've just got constituents that continually, as a drumbeat, both in email and in catching me, that their inspection stations are also saying, listen, it's the state standard. We think these rotors are safe, but the surface rust is what I need to bill you on, or you gotta fix this. So they're pointing the finger at the state to think maybe we need to adjust the language a little bit so that it's really focused on safety and not necessarily perceivable rust. But I don't know.
The answer to this question is my thing is I can't tell that picture, but if you got there and they were grooved and rusted, then I would say they probably wouldn't pass.
This rotor right here is a complete pass. I took this picture this morning in my driveway. This is my Cruiser, and this is it parked in the parking lot directly across the street after use. I've been sick the last week, so my car's been sitting in the driveway. It's been raining, snowing, and miserable. What you saw in this picture was typical surface rust. This is exactly what we see when a car sits and it's not being used, okay? Now, if that thing sat for a month, that rust is gonna build up. It's gonna swell, it's gonna become delaminated, it's gonna be pitted, and then it's gonna lead to a failure. Use of your brakes, clean your brakes, and that prolongs your life. So it's not the amount of miles that you put on a car that determines the life of the brakes. Actually, sometimes it's use. So it's just getting your car out and driving it, wiping the rust off, having the pads hit it. And you can see that this is a perfectly good rotor. This is what one should look like. These are the ones that I brought in as an example. This is the swelling that you see, the delamination, the pitting. When we say a ½ inch, okay, I can't come up with a standard for every make, model, manufacturer, car, everything out there, because our manual would look like a New York City phone book, right? It would be huge.
Was it a ½ inch depth or it's a ½ inch?
½ inch
width?
cumulative rust, and that's rust on the breakable surface, okay? And that's when it's swollen, pitted, so it creates an uneven surface, so that pad is not affixing to that shiny surface
But
that is designed.
Does it just that because what I've heard, and I haven't looked at the manual a long time, is that it's just a ½ inch, so that a surface rust of a ½ inch would be a fail.
A ½ inch on the breakable surface, correct?
Even though you could drive it around the block a couple times and get it.
No. This rust does not come off. The surface rust that I show you comes off. There's a difference.
So how does the manual differentiate between surface rust and non-surface?
It has a definition. You see, what happened in 2013, the old manual simply read, rust or cracks exist on drum or contact surface, period. So based on that definition, my Ford failed, right? That was not the intent when it was written, okay? The intent was that rust is now defined, because when we rewrote the manual, we added that definition. So that definition now says, rust is defined as any condition of swelling, delamination, or pitting. That's what I brought in last time. So you take your finger and you run it across that shiny silver part, and then when you get to that part, it's raised, it's swollen, okay? And that's not gonna come off with use. That's because that's rust. That's illegal, that's what you can't have. So picture a brake pad hitting the rotor, creating that friction, right? You just took away 20% of the effectiveness and the efficiency of that braking of that rotor, because now it's hitting an area that it's not affixing to because it's rusted, it's uneven, right? So now you go another year, 30, 40%, and you got 2 inches of breakable surface on that pad. Now, where that makes a difference isn't stopping going 25 miles an hour driving around the neighborhood. Where that makes a difference is when you're in a panic emergency situation. And then your brakes, if you go by theory, then stops at 20% less efficiency. That means the difference between stopping at 100 feet versus 80 feet.
So we're really struggling because EVs, obviously, braking is quite different than other vehicles. And so the question, we've been told that Pennsylvania has dealt with this situation. Have you looked at the Pennsylvania standard, and would that address it? Because if you've got an EV and it's a year old and you're not doing a lot of braking, you haven't got a lot of use in the same way, and you're getting fail, and that's what, it's an example of what we're hearing.
Last year, I did the same demonstration with the pictures, and the distance which I traveled for those 2 pictures was from my house to Dunkin' Donuts to get a coffee on the way to work. That's a mile from my house. And that brake went from that orange to shiny. The electric vehicle, I don't see any reason why you get into an electric vehicle that you can't apply the brakes and utilize them in order to wipe the rust off. The same theory would apply. You don't use them as often, but you should still be activating your brakes.
So
the years they don't
surface
rust up.
rust in of itself, if you could take it out, drive it a little bit and take it off, then that vehicle wouldn't fail.
Yeah,
If you
what
don't do
happens
that,
is-
it does fail.
The rust builds up for inactivity.
Yeah,
Right? It's from the
I
car.
found that out with
Yes.
my e-brake.
Yes.
that did not release, and therefore my rear wheel wouldn't turn because it was,
But also remember, it's not just the rotors that rust. Your calipers rust, your brake lines rust, and they seize, they don't function. You have to use them. You have to take them out for a walk.
Do you have, I think you do, have data on the fails? Because like every fail has to send you a picture and a report, basically, right? Each inspection station.
We don't always get photos now.
So they just have, but they have to say, here's how we failed and this is what we failed for.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a broader category.
They could just say brakes. You
Yeah.
don't know if it was rust or.
Yeah, so it could be various different components of the braking system.
Because it seems like what you're saying is that or maybe this is a question for you. Is it your belief that the vehicles that are failing inspection due to rust on the rotor are all legitimate delamination, meeting the standard, and there is not a problem with cars failing just because of surface rust?
We have approximately 1,100 inspection stations in the state of Vermont. We have 3,200 or so active inspection mechanics. Varying degrees of education, training, formal training, informal training, on-the-job training, and different levels of experience. And that's a very wide spectrum. We tried to write this manual to the far end of that spectrum so that we can accompany all levels, right? The way we wrote it, the diagram was to address that. Are there some, as I watched Bob Church testify yesterday, and he spoke that some work on consignment, I guess. They get paid based on how
Flat rate.
orders they flat, yeah. Are there some that aren't representing the way they should? Probably, but that's where that process comes in that Bob did describe, where we have our investigators, we follow up and we take a look into it. Are there some that just interpret it differently? You've all been to the doctors, right? And sometimes you ask for a second opinion. Because sometimes the symptoms, the clues, or whatever it may be are different. Some mechanics are better than the others. I happen to be very proud of my mechanic as we share the same one. And I have a lot of faith in that mechanic. There's others I have been to that I do not have any faith in. So you do have that spectrum as well, where you have to factor in the human factor. But we try to make it as clear as possible. And that's why we define rust versus just saying rust as much as possible.
Because it seems like what we're all hearing from constituents over and over again is that, and I don't know, they don't get to like exactly whether they said the rust was delaminating, and I think they sometimes show a picture of the rust and say, it failed, look at all the rust, and the average person doesn't know. So if you have to have all the constituents, consumers be so educated about it to whether they go to get a second opinion or challenge the technician. And it's difficult also when it's connected to inspection. Because if you just say like, well, I don't know if I'm going to go, my brakes feel fine, I'm going to go get a second opinion next week. But if you're like, oh, I have to fail inspection and you're sicker, you're now going to be driving around with a failed inspection. They feel like, oh, I don't really have a choice. I just got to get it fixed because I don't want to have a.
Yeah, you can definitely get a second opinion and go see somebody else.
I know, I'm just saying, I'm not saying they can't. I'm just saying that's a general, there's a feeling that when they're told you failed inspection, that they want to not fail inspection and not wait and drive with a expired inspection sticker. So that kind of adds a different dynamic than a regular car repair, I think. That's just a little, adds some time pressure. So if there is a garage that's saying, hey, maybe they're interpreting it wrong, maybe they didn't read the manual closely, or they're just trying to get an extra sale, then it's hard to put all that on the consumer. And so we're trying to help them. And maybe it's not change the manual, because maybe the manual's fine, but it's like, hey, here's something that we ask DMV to send out to all the inspection stations. Like, you know, the legislature has hearing complaints. They told us to send you this letter. This is what the guidance says. You know, make sure that you're not failing without that. And the one suggestion that Bob Church had, which I don't know if you heard this in his testimony, wanted to know what you thought. He suggested that we put the names, like, you have a question about the inspection process or a complaint, here's who you call.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people would not know.
Yeah, we post that online to try to make it as convenient as possible for folks.
What do you think about putting it in the garage?
We could certainly do that. You know, that would probably involve a rule change to mandate the garages, you know, put up, you know, a poster indicating
Right, yeah.
call enforcement and safety.
Senator Mazza has a question. Senator Mazza?
You're muted, sir.
Oh, yeah, we muted you earlier, so you have to unmute.
You have to unmute, Senator Miles, you gotta do that? There you go.
There you go.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Are there photos taking of the parts or anything? Is there any photo that follows through to show that it is serious or not serious, or does that have any effect at all? Of photos taken?
By the garage, does the garage take photos of what, when they're failing?
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
But it's not a requirement.
It's not a requirement.
Or
It's encouraged. Yep. It's encouraged for their own protection. To be frank, we take complaints from folks, and when we look into it, we find our garages and our partners are excellent partners overall. I mean, you got a few bad eggs and everything. I completely get that, and that's why I have a job. But the reality is the vast majority of our time as inspectors is spent educated. So if we have a station that was confused and didn't understand this, we'll send an inspector out, we'll walk them through it, explain this is a standard, this is what you're looking for, this is how you do it. And that's really what we spend our most time on. We want our businesses to be successful, and we want the program to be successful. So
I've yet to see anything written that's perfect. I mean, even our constitution has been amended multiple times, and many would argue it needs to be revised. And so this manual was 2013 and then 2017, 2018. And I think I heard you say that there's a couple of spaces where you might want to see a couple of words. Do you think the language around rotors is perfect in our current manual, or do you think that there might be opportunity for, based on everything you've heard over the last 5-6 years, do you think there's some opportunity for additional clarity to address a lot of these concerns that keep percolating?
Well, here's the thing, to be frank, we put together a pretty robust group of folks. I mean, here's the core group of folks that we put together to actually examine all these changes that we made in the manual. And I could put together another core group of folks and they could come up with something different. And then somebody will find something that, and then I got to put together another core group of folks. And do we keep doing that? And at what point do we accept what we do have, and we continue to educate inspection stations and the consumer and do the best we can in that department? So that's the question, I think, is more than anything is.
6 years though, I mean.
I would encourage this, because I think with the level of complaints that we're getting, we're going to be forced to do something. And I don't even know what that something is. I don't even know if we could come up in a group, but I would encourage all the stations that are failing because of brakes to start taking pictures to defend themselves. And so for education purposes, because I think that, I just think that there's going to be that level of uproar that something's going to get done, and whether it's right and then whether it's going to solve the problem, I don't know that. But there's a lot of noise out there.
Right, and I think we're getting it, so maybe it should really be directed towards the inspection enforcement. So you hear that same level of complaints. I don't know how many complaints you get about the rotors.
Well, I do. I hear emails about rotors. I hear emails, but when anybody gets an $850 bill, they're not happy, regardless.
Yeah, or 60.
So sometimes it's emotion based, and sometimes we follow up. The inspection station was absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Sometimes the inspection station needs education. It varies all over the board. But one of the things that I do when somebody sends me an email, I write back to them. I send them a copy of the manual, and again, we try to write the manual to which it's very understandable. I can read it and understand it. And that's the whole idea. We want the consumer to be able to read it and understand it and be able to walk into the inspection station and say, this doesn't fit the definition, and to be able to actually question it if they feel it's not the standard. And I haven't had too many people call me back saying, I don't get this. You
So,
know, they get it when it's explained to them exactly what rust is, and sometimes it takes that explanation. So yeah, I do receive complaints on that.
but if I'm sitting here listening to this exchange and the conversation, it seems, I just want to make it clear, it sounds like you believe that the current requirements and standards are appropriate and that you're not recommending changes at this time. And maybe that's not true. I mean, you're explaining why it's important, et cetera, but I don't know to what extent you've taken a specific position that change is needed, or what we have now, when people understand why it's being required and so forth, that it's the right thing to do for safety purposes. So could you just be clearer, because I'm not sure whether you really do have a specific position around modification or status quo.
I don't think there's a perfect definition. If there is a perfect definition, then all the states would be using it in their inspection program. I brought Maine with me and I brought Pennsylvania because both of those came up recently. I look at both of those and I find them ambiguous. If you say to a mechanic that's at this level versus at this level with ASE, factory certification, on the job training, no experience, or whatever it may be, to determine if the rust on the rotor affects its braking capability. I can't do that. And I don't know too many mechanics that can make that determination. So that's pretty ambiguous and it's pretty opinion based.
But isn't it like, if it seems like you're saying if it's laminated or if it's raised, then it would.
I think it's more defined. I like our definition more than Pennsylvania, and I like our definition more than Maine because it's more specific. And from an accountability perspective, how do I hold a station accountable that's not doing the right thing with ambiguous language like that? So the mechanic's going to argue.
Can I read our definition? Do you have our definition in front of you? Can I read it?
Yeah. Here's one. Let's see here. And here's Vermont today, old, here's Maine.
I didn't mean to cut you
Oh,
off.
here's Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with Senator Ingalls that the level of complaints, and they keep coming around, because I think they don't know who else to call, so they call their state representative.
Yeah. And those get funneled to our office.
Yeah,
you
well,
know.
I should be funding them to your office. I don't think I haven't been doing that.
If I may.
Yeah.
So I would argue that this language, if I'm an inspection station, can be interpreted in ways that are creating the flurry of emails and just the very rational arguments that they're inappropriately being failed. Just as if more than a ½ inch of rust cumulative per braking surface exists on any contact surface of the rotor or drum. To me, that's that surface rust which gets things failed.
No, because then there's a definition of rust. So what I did, let me see here.
Well, my point is what I see in this one, I argue, I think would decrease the amount of frustration, which appears excessively rusted so that the integrity of the drum or disc is compromised or the braking efficiency is compromised. Surface rust wouldn't qualify there. So my point is,
So what you don't have in
we
this
don't
one.
have perfect language. I think our language could be better.
So what you don't have in this, and I don't know how I missed it when I cut and pasted it, my mistake, is you don't have this. In the manual, it says, no, rust is defined as a condition of any swelling, delamination, or pitting.
So
It's not
are those two
simple.
next to each other, or you have to go to the definition?
No, it's actually here. I cut and pasted quick. Like I said, I've been a little under the weather, so I did kind of quick notes together here to bring in. But actually in the manual, it's written here, and then right underneath where it says here in the manual, it says note, and then it defines what rust is. So it is pretty clearly written in the inspection manual.
I wondered if we would just put it in there where it says the ½ inch of rust, that is delaminated, blah, 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 right there, instead of having to go look at the definition. Because I think even some, a garage is saying like, well, here it says right in the manual, they just don't show you the part down below.
just that half-inch piece just is what I
That's
think
what
people are
I heard.
interpreting.
And I think that's what
Yeah.
Bob Church was saying as well.
And the other thing that's missing from this cut and paste, because I just wanted the wording for myself, is the picture that's in the manual right here, that's right depicted here, showing what the rust looks like and what a half-inch cumulative rust means. And so there's a picture. there's a
Right, but that
definition.
doesn't really tell you that it's raised or delaminating. The photo,
Yeah, no,
that shows you kind of like the breaking surface, the half inch.
but that's what the definition says.
Right,
I could offer this, I could send out a bulletin rather than rewriting, manual or going through the
Bring
APA
attention
process.
to the
To
note.
send out a bulletin that clarifies this.
Yeah.
You know, inspection stations.
I think, that something along the lines that we've talked about here of a bulletin going out there and saying the legislature is getting, almost a warning, the legislature is getting a ton of, and we're getting just, not made up, we're getting a lot of complaints, and that they're gonna be forced, they're gonna feel like they have to do something. And, make them aware of it.
and I think it goes to what, I think Judge Zone talking about a separate issue about just the public's confidence in government and the public confidence in the inspection system. I think as more and more of these complaints happen, I get more and more people saying, hey, a lot of states have gotten rid of the inspection system. One of it seems to be broken and it's just costing us money. There's no evidence that it provides safety, so let's just get rid of it. That's what I'm worried about, is that that's gonna feed into that argument.
And my concern with just a bulletin, although I'm not against a bulletin, that's the point in time. If it's not in the manuals, we got new inspectors, they move in from out of state, new hired
I thought
individuals.
it was in the manual.
Are the
No,
bulletins
no.
in the manual?
No, I thought the inspection manual,
Well, my
That
point is,
definition.
He's talking about just what the effect of a bulletin would have.
oh,
it would be permanently in what the inspectors will refer to. Which
I guess I must have missed it. I thought what you were doing is reaffirming that provision that sometimes if people aren't looking at the note, is the note in the inspection manual in terms of
The
what
definition,
the
yeah.
definition?
Yeah,
It is, it's there now.
Right, and you say you could send a bulletin, it's like, don't forget.
Yeah,
look
a
at it.
reminder,
Yeah.
section of the manual, or
But Senator Chinden is saying that only gets you so far for the people that read the bulletin. Next year, a new person hadn't read the bulletin, they might go back to having a problem.
but the manual still has it in there. It's just, seems to be.
What we don't know is how much is it people misreading the manual or not having enough training, and how much is people trying to upsell customers.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
think
probably all of the above.
I can provide clarification. This doesn't include surface rust. This isn't something that comes off with use. You know, and I could provide a good narrative in a bulletin along with the definition and along with that section speaking to rust on rotors and be very specific and get that out to,
Do those additional instructions stay on that automated system, the AVIC system? They go out, they don't go out on that.
no, it's just a written.
Okay, well, we'll probably talk more about it and we can come back to you on that. Do you have anything to talk to us, say about window tinting?
Yeah, sure. Got another. I like to come prepared here.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry. There we go. All right.
We got a folder for tinting.
Yeah. Hey, I gotta keep track of it, you know, a lot of moving parts, literally, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
You
gotta see mine.
So any particular questions that you have, and maybe we start with regarding the tinting and concerns that you have?
I guess the question is how you would see if we were to require it as part to, or switch back to a fail as it was, and we said something like, you know, no more than a 30% tint. What would that mean for the inspection program? Like, other than buying a device, or just do you see problems? Do you have comments on either advising for or against that as far as operating the program?
Yeah, one of the things that we wrestled with, and we've talked about this as a committee, is pass, fail, and advisory. When we rewrote the manual, it was 547 pages, 3 volumes, and it included everything from having mechanics enforcing front license plates to carrying insurance cards to all kinds of stuff.
I heard it even the front headlight wipers.
Yeah,
So,
it was all kinds of stuff that we had them doing. And we took all that out because we wanted to focus just on what affects the safe operation of the vehicle. So we made advisories. So when you go in to get your car inspected and you have window tint, you check off advisory and it would print on the VIR saying you may be in violation of Title 23, 1125. We already have a state law against it. Enforcement can enforce it. They can go out, they can write tickets, and they're the ones that can take the enforcement action on tinted windows rather than mechanics. If that makes sense. So that was why we went with the advisory.
I don't know if you heard the test or saw the testimony from law enforcement. They said they have some difficult conversations when they say, oh, we're going to give you a ticket for this tinting, and they say, I just had it inspected yesterday.
Well, that same argument could be made if law enforcement stopped somebody for not having a front plate. Well, I just passed inspection and I didn't have a front plate.
I said, yeah, right.
Right? And that underneath that one, it says you're in violation of Title 23, Section 311, of not having a front plate. Right? That's on the VIR. They were informed. So either I put all that stuff back in, that was an advisory, or you're still going to have that contradiction. The reality of it is the inspection mechanic doesn't enforce all of Title 23. They enforce what involves the safe operation of a motor vehicle. That's what they inspect.
Yeah.
So you're, Scott, you're saying more than anything, probably, I think, that, and correct me, because I don't want to put words in here, but that the owner has some responsibility to know what the rules are and to, and that they choose, even though it might pass inspection, it doesn't mean that they're compliant, and that they run the risk of getting stopped for violation by having two darker windows, not a front license plate on, that it's their responsibility to know what that is.
It is, and we actually helped that situation by printing a VIR vehicle inspection report with an advisory, even telling them what section. So they should be made aware of it by the inspection station, as well as it's still a violation of law.
Okay, Senator Mazza, did you have a question?
Is the front plate required or not required?
As inspection, it's an advisory.
Right.
But legally, it's
But
required.
legally, it's required.
Legally, it's required. Yep.
But in practice, do we pull people over if they don't have a front plate?
I don't think so, because I see a lot of cars without front
Without a front plate.
Well, there's
But
a lot of
technically,
cars, a lot
It
of
is a
cars,
violation.
brackets in the front. There's no place to put it in the front. You'd have to drill a hole somewhere in the car.
Yep. Yep.
We heard that Teslas,
Yeah. And we have the Vermont Strong plates now, which are, acceptable for its front plate.
one of the safety connected arguments had to do with not being able to see if the driver, if you're a pedestrian or a cyclist, you can't have that eye contact with these very darkly tinted. So the argument that we were hearing, or when law enforcement is going up and you can't see in the vehicle, the analogy was when you go to the border, they make you put your windows down so they can see in the car. So that was another argument we had relative. So
And also
the-
from the driver seeing out, their view is.
So that was the connection, should that, because of the safety related issues with and at night as well, should that in fact, even though it's currently illegal, should it result in a failure, not an advisory?
Yeah.
That's part of what we've been hearing.
Again, all those items that we took out and made advisory because we
They
wanted
know
to
it's
stick-
advisory, you're putting it on,
Yeah,
that you could still get, it's still illegal.
But
yeah,
so,
we just don't have mechanics enforcing 547 pages of manual. We now have them focusing on 162 pages of what involves the safe operation of a motor vehicle.
so people are making the argument that this is a safe operation of the
Right,
vehicle.
that's.
Yeah. Yep.
And we did hear from law enforcement about, the risk they
Having
feel.
been in law enforcement for 35 years, I feel approaching a vehicle, I feel much safer if I can see inside the vehicle. Why Border Patrol has you put windows down, certainly a safer approach. From a law enforcement perspective, yeah, I would like to not have it tinted. But if I didn't like it tinted, I could issue it a ticket for Section 1125 and Title 23, and I could take action. That's what I can do as law enforcement rather than have the mechanic do that.
So we used to have this fail prior to 2017-18. We changed it to an advisory.
With a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, they really shortened it, because we were getting complaints about surface rust on the vehicle, and, that had nothing to do with safety at all, otherwise I couldn't get in.
And tinting in today's vehicles is different than, we were joking about this as kids, you used to go down the egg stripes, you
Yeah.
go to Walmart or whatever, you buy the tinting, you take your credit card and put it on yourself, and yeah, you couldn't see out those windows, but a lot of cars now are being manufactured with tinting, and
Well, that was the other issue, how you would measure
We
what
would-
is, this above the standard.
And we would just match it with the federal standards, basically what we would do is just say like, anybody, because right now it's against the law to put any tinting on the truck.
Yeah.
So we say like, okay, anybody can do it to work up to the federal law, but it is a safety issue. That's why the federal law is what it is, because the safety, so we are gonna follow that safety rule and say it's not safe to operate a vehicle with tinting over 30%.
Yeah.
Okay, do you have anything else you want to say about that?
no, I think just from a law enforcement perspective, we've had a lot of conversation versus during secondary stops. The sun shadowing, I could drive by and go, that's more than 30%, but then get up close after I stop the vehicle and go, nah, that looks like 30%, and then pull out my tint meter and try to measure that at roadside, and, the glare.
Well, that's their argument why we should do it at the inspection station.
Yeah, if you did it at an inspection, again, in my mind, it's the slippery slope of, do we go back to adding to the inspection manual, so it's 547 pages again? Or do we stick to the safe operation of a vehicle and leave that up to our mechanics to make that determination?
People are saying this is leaving it to safe operation of the vehicle, so that's the discussion is this a safety issue or is it not? But
Yeah.
and then I don't know if you have anything to say about the federal regulation of muffler stamps and if that.
That's in the,
Or is that, I'm assuming it's a similar issue in that you might say it's not safe operation of the vehicle.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, absolutely. But really, from my perspective, I'm not a motorcycle person. And as a law enforcement officer, first time I saw that stamp was last year. We had this conversation, and I had a picture of it sent to me from Wilkes Harley. And what I have done is that I've gone online, I've looked around, and there's so many different bikes, ages bikes, types of bikes, street, off-road, different type of muffling systems. Sometimes they're visible, or sometimes they're not, maybe. Aftermarket, sometimes after 10 years, manufacturers don't make that part anymore, and you got to get an aftermarket, or you have to get one that doesn't fit that model year, therefore that stamp isn't applicable for that motorcycle. There's a few complexities to this, and after a little while, my head just started to spin, and I said, this is something we got to spend more time taking a look at, if we're going to go with that. So my recommendation isn't to ask me, it's to ask industry, to bring somebody in from the motorcycle industry, see whether or not this is standard for parts.
there's some that are so,
Yes,
the intensity of the noise is just hurts your ears.
feel it in your chest.
Yeah, you can.
Right, I've seen people like almost fall down by hearing the noise. It comes, they're just not ready for it. They're just like, so shocking. I mean, the goal there was it's a federal regulation that they have to stamp. So we're saying you follow the federal regulation. But we understand some people take them off, but they're 9 to 10 for they had an accident, they rebuilt, they couldn't find that part.
But even for inspection purposes, how difficult it is to take a motorcycle muffler off, get it inspected with the stock, and put the after.
Yeah, I don't know.
Snowmobiles last year.
Yeah.
We did use the decal as the sort of
Right.
verification.
And we could have some meeting to say about that. How often is the stamp on the back side of the muffler where you can't see it? And somebody else has said like, well, we require them to take the tires off to look at the brakes. So is taking off like the cladding to look at the muffler any different?
We are doing the muffler study as well, so.
Oh, you are doing a monthly
We're
study,
doing
Noise study.
Noise study,
noise study.
Right.
there's an exhaust, yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that there might be some language in the manual. If this can of worms does get open, was there another manila envelope you would have with information about things that you'd want to consider if this were to be?
I'll give you an example. When I say some of this stuff is trivial, it's trivial. So for example, when you enter data into AVIP, you put like a VIN number, right? There used to be in the schedule of fines, there used to be a penalty for basically making a fat finger mistake, entering wrong information, bad information, right? And the first time we gave a warning, second time it was like a $25 fine, but there's some accountability for first time's a mistake, I get it, you make it an error, it happens, second time, third time, we have some stations multiple times, we keep getting errors because they're just not taking the time and putting in good data, right? Somehow, when we rewrote the manual, the word fraudulently got put in there. So it fraudulently now enter that data wrong. I can't show that anybody's fraudulently doing that, right? So I can't hold anybody accountable for fat fingers or you know what I'm saying? But that's the type of things that I have on my list. It's nothing that I am gonna put all of the time and effort into the APA process to make a change on. But if some ways down the road, I would do that.
So if this process gets reopened, if this moves forward, you would still be empowered to be able to take your list and integrate it into that process. Okay. You wouldn't need us to like include your list.
No.
Okay. Deputy Commissioner, you're just here for color, or did you have a color commentary, or did you have something else?
Yeah, shirt on.
Yeah.
And a new pair of shoes. So I don't really have a whole lot to offer. I mean, we don't really feel like you need to legislate us to look at the process in the manual. So we don't do that. Needs to happen.
Okay. Anything else, Captain Dixon?
No, I, as always, appreciate your time.
Yeah.
We're excited to have you come in. We were, good to see you. Hope you feel better. Feeling better.
Yeah.
We'll get that new house done.
All right, Senator Mazza, anything else?
Nope, see you tomorrow. I'll be there.